The following presentation was recorded live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for the 22nd Annual International Association of Square Dance Callers. This is tape number 10, Techniques for Self-Improvement.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the session on Techniques for Self-Improvement. We're ready to go here. If you've not seen the handouts, they are back on the chairs there, although I understand that there is one with a triangle that we have run out of copies of, and so be it. We will maybe have a way to obtain additional ones of those later on. My name is Gregg Anderson from Colorado Springs. I have with me on the panel this afternoon Laural Eddy from Macon, Georgia, and Tom Miller from Chess Springs, Pennsylvania. Ooh. For the purposes of the tape recording, the question was, which one is which? If you're not familiar with the personalities, you would have to have seen it to fully appreciate the differences. I'm speaking into a wide-angle microphone. Okay. Techniques for self-improvement. One of the techniques is don't dig a hole so deep for yourself that you can't get back out again, which I'm working on at this point. We're going to share the microphone this afternoon because there's a lot of ways of approaching this, and we're also obviously wanting to give you an opportunity to ask questions. There are many ways to think about self-improvement. Some of them are the more logical, and we'll be talking about some of the things like the callers' colleges and opportunities like that. But some of them are just the little tricks of the trade that we hope that maybe along the way you'll pick up a few of them that perhaps had not occurred to you before. Self-improvement is really critical to your calling profession. Even if, like me, you're a local caller who calls just part-time because you've got a full-time job, we like to obviously improve not only for our own personal worth, I guess, but also because we realize there's a lot of other callers that dancers have to choose from out there. We like to improve upon our technical abilities, our showmanship abilities, our choreographic abilities, our stage presence, our public relations. There's all sorts of things. So we're going to hit up on a few of those things. But I wanted to especially pass the mic to Tom because we were sharing some thoughts during lunch, and we thought we could launch right into one of the technical aspects, and he had one on diction that I think really is quite important.
Thank you, Greg. Good afternoon, everybody. Now, if you're going to say it, you say it all together or you don't say it at all. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. That's great. We were talking there at lunch, and we were talking about self-improvement. One of the things I come up with was the diction. And a lot of times when you hear callers, they slur their words together. And then there's the guys that are real clear and so forth. And one of the ways that I learned diction, and I'll just pass this on to you, is back in 1974 when I went to caller school, one of the things they said to do that if you have a hard time with your diction is to take marbles and kind of stuff your mouth with marbles. And as you start talking and learning your diction, you take one marble out at a time, and when you lose all your marbles, you become a square dance caller. So so that's one of the things. What we're going to touch on today is some of the things, the professional improvement techniques. And if you picked up a pamphlet and so forth, who did not get one of these? You should have been here earlier then. We'll make sure you get copies of these. Okay, we'll make sure that we get some more of these to you. Pardon me?
There will be a table that they have arranged for they'll put all of the handouts out on the table, so if people have bought the tapes but not attended the sessions, they'll be able to pick them up, and we will make every effort to get extra copies on that table by the time they're ready for pickup.
That's my words exactly. I owe you a couple. One of the things we're going to start off with is the caller schools and colleges. We're just going to elaborate a little bit. If one of on the list that you had for the caller schools, okay, and we want to make sure that Stan Burdick's name was not added to the list, and we apologize. So everybody make a note that Stan Burdick is on the list and so forth, and also on the Callers Colleges and as a caller coach also. So we want to make that note, and we thank Kathy for bringing that to our attention. Caller schools, how many, Greg was going to ask this question, but I'll kind of ask it. How many callers here have never been to a caller school? Okay. How many has been to a caller school in the last 3 years? How many has been to a caller school in the last 5 years? Now, if you're a caller coach, you do not qualify for any of these questions that I'm asking. So, Randy, sit back here and be quiet. Caller schools are very important for self-improvement. That's probably the priority number one thing on the list is caller schools. And the reason being is the caller coaches are trained to sit back, to evaluate what you're calling, and making sure that your stage appearance and your techniques and your styling is in order. And so he or she may see things that you're not particularly aware that you're doing as bad habits, as we want to call it, and so forth. So we want to add that we put caller schools number one. If you've never been to a caller school, we highly recommend it. At least go at least once, because you may be doing things very well in your home program, and everything's going well because you know how you're handling yourself and so forth. But there's that chance that there's something that you might be missing, and that caller school is most likely to pick it up. Number two is membership in caller dancer organization. It's very important to be involved in your local callers association and your dancer association. What's nice about a callers association is that everybody has a different way of doing things. So the next guy beside you may have a different way of teaching a class versus the way that you teach it, or vice versa. So it's very important to remember that your best friend that's in your callers association may be the best person to go to for some advice. And it's not being very proud to not ask questions. You know, it doesn't hurt to ask questions. That's the only way you can learn. And so you might want to consider that also. Number three, the seminars. I do a lot of festivals throughout the country, and a lot of them has the seminars. And I talk to some guys, and they say they're not coming to the seminar just because they've been to so many seminars and everything's the same. Most seminars at the conventions or a festival and so forth, it's so hard to get everything wrapped up into an hour session. So even if you've been to so many seminars throughout the festivals that you've attended and so forth, it does not hurt to go back to show the support of your colleagues and your peers. That you're probably saying, what does that have to do with self-improvement? Trust me. When your colleagues see you setting into a session of seminars and so forth, that helps your self-improvement. It kind of builds that relationship and so forth. So we highly stress that you go to your seminars and so forth. If you have a local callers association that does a seminar, and you're available to go to it, and in all cases, make sure that you get to go, because you can always pick up something along the way. Number 4 on the list is workshop and dances called and taught by other callers. A lot of guys and girls that call square dances is they're working, they're calling 5-6 nights a week, and they have that one extra night that they could go to a square dance but don't. I always try to say, if you're off and you're available to go to another caller that's calling a square dance, make sure you do so. You can sit back and take notes. The best way to do it is put one of the small notebooks in your back pocket, and as that caller is calling, you can write down the little sequences he or she is calling. And not necessarily if you're from the same area, it's pretty hard to do his or her choreography. But when you go out to another club away from your area, it's always nice to open up that notebook, and there's all these little sequences that you put in your form. So, or a tape recorder, which I think Laurel's going to get into that as a couple minutes here progresses and so forth.
Let me just throw in one point here about going to other callers' dances that I've found is a very valid technique. And that is, it's not only important to see what the caller is doing right, but to see what the caller is doing wrong. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong for him, but there's no damage whatsoever, and there's a lot to be gained by evaluating a particular thing that a caller does and says, well, I can see how that works for him. I can see how he got that crowd response by the way he did it. That particular way of doing something, or that particular way of putting choreography together, or that particular way of delivering a singing call doesn't fit me for these particular reasons. If you can establish a continuing thought process to not only observe what's going on, but to understand why the caller is able to accomplish those things, and to then relate it to yourself to decide, now, can I use that for myself, or is that something I should stay away from for these reasons? By doing that, I think you will learn more about yourself and be able to improve better.
Okay, thank you. A couple of other things about going to other callers and so forth. It's always nice when you're calling a dance and you look back and you see some callers coming through the door. It's kind of a nice sigh of relief to let you know that your colleagues feel that that they can take time to come and dance to you and so forth. And and to talk to these callers and walk over and say, well, what did you think about that singing call? I've done that already, where you walk over and you say, do you do that song? And they say, yeah. Well, basically, how do you do it? And before you know it, you got a communication between the two callers. And so all these little things for self-improvement, we could stand up here, and put everything together and for a couple of hours. And it's basically a tool that you have to build for your own. You have to get all these together and do your own little trick to make your self-improvement better for yourself. I'm going to turn the microphone over to Laura. She's going to touch on the personal improvement technique and maybe cover some of the things that I missed over the professional improvement. Yes, microphone, please.
I just wanted to ask you to finish the comments you had on diction. It got kind of sidetracked with the paperwork that was going to be handed out and didn't finish the thing that you were talking about on diction initially.
Sorry, Tom.
Well, I'm taking notes. Let me tell you.
Yeah, I'm glad he gave me the opportunity to step in, because I did want to throw in one comment on a serious note. A mirror is a great thing to use if you're trying to practice your diction, because if you look in the mirror and purposely exaggerate your mouth movements so that you can get the commands out, and even though that may not be the way that you would call the dance, if you force yourself, and the force is the visual confirmation that you're really doing it, looking in the mirror and doing those kinds of exercises with your mouth to improve the diction, especially obviously on the key commands, on the singing calls, the key commands. Go ahead and slur if you want on the chorus, but if you're doing the key commands, be sure you stress those. And I think a mirror can be an effective tool for teaching yourself that.
Thank you. I think that Tom touched on a lot of important things, as well as Greg, but there are a couple things that I just wanted to bring up on the first section where we were talking about professional improvement. There's nothing like the camaraderie that you develop within an association or with a fellow caller. If you can find one person who will be brutally honest with you, you are so much better off. Somebody that you can tell exactly what you think, and you know that you can accept that same type of criticism. And I think that's a problem that we as callers sometimes have, because we're good. We know it. And we don't want to hear this bad stuff. You need to develop that rapport with somebody so that they can share with you. And I think that's how you do it, through your local associations, where you're calling to the same types of people, where you've got some continuity in the dance programs of the area. Also, just want to say, it's very, very important that you not take yourself too seriously. We all make mistakes, and you're going to make mistakes throughout whatever you do. So don't feel that as you begin working on diction, for example, some dancer comes up and says, I really had a hard time understanding that this time. Don't beat yourself up. Sometimes we're our own worst enemies. And it's okay to say, but I'm working on that, and feel that you're making some improvement. One of the things that I'm going to move on down to the next section on this list. One of the things that the blurb in the directions itinerary said was that we were going to provide a list of some resources that you can use. Probably many of you have much better resources than we were able to bring today. And if you've got some, we hope that you're going to be willing to share some of those ideas with you. But we just want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that you yourself can look at what's available out there in print or on video or through other communications and see what's around. Books are terrific, and we probably all got just gobs and gobs of books stuck in the bookshelf. There's a trick to using a book for self-improvement. You have to take it out of the shelf. You cannot get anything out of it on the shelf.
Just for clarification, that was book? Yeah, and shelf, yes.
Now look, I can take that from Tom because he's from around here, but you have an accent too, so get on. I haven't lost mine. Book. But you do really have to take them out and use them for something. They don't make, they're real good dust collectors, but they're not doing anything to improve your calling. I found that if I get a book, if I don't read it within the first 2 weeks, it's gone and I'm not going to use it. So I think if you're going to make that sort of investment, you need to be certain that you're fixing to use it right then. That means about to use it right then. Okay, moving on. One of the things that I have really enjoyed, especially about being in an organization like CALLERLAB, is that you get to network with so many of the people who had a real important role in developing what we now call modern square dancing. There's some materials out there that I know are out of print, but there are folks who may be able to find copies of these, and I've bummed one of these. One of my favorite is The Fundamentals of Hash Calling by Gene Trimmer, and I bummed it from Grace Wheatley, so if you want to look at it, check with Grace right up here. It's wonderful, and it's a step-by-step process, and if you've never looked at it, you really need to give it an idea because it just makes you think along the...
This book's out of print.
Listen, I'm going to tell you where to get some of these resources. You ever heard of a garage sale?
Sure.
Absolutely. This is some notes that I found in a notebook at a yard sale from Les Gocher from 1961. It's great ideas for workshops. It's so much fun to go back and read and see where we came from, and my dancers love it. I'm never doing a panel with you again.
Is it illustrating showmanship?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's several other old books that are up here, which it's amazing to see how we've progressed and changed, and yet how much of what we originally started with we've been able to maintain and we feel is important to the activity. Other kinds of books that I think you need to look at are choreography. Look at the different methods of calling, because they're just bukus out there. So just find every available resource, but be sure you're going to use it. There's no need to put out the money or waste the time going through the first 2 chapters if you're not going to finish it. Note services are something that's always available. There are quite a lot of those, and in several of the magazines, regional publications and things, you can find a list of those. We did provide a list of some of those with some of the handouts. The one I have up here is an old copy. Does everybody know what a note service is? Oh, yes? A note service. Who's translating? Who's translating today? They're a problem. Note services, let me caution the same thing. I'm really bad about taking them and sticking them in a notebook, probably not quite as old a notebook as that one, but sticking them in a notebook and never using them. They don't do you any good unless you're actually utilizing all that stuff. Magazines are out there. Probably the one that is the most nationally known is American Square Dance, and that has a real wide variety of different viewpoints. We as callers sometimes get caught up in the technical aspect of things. Please don't forget that we're working with people. We are in people-pleasing jobs. And if we don't get out there and do what the dancers need us to do, not just the technical, choreographic stuff, but we have to be out there relating to them on a very personal level. And I think that's what some of these articles are able to do. There are lots of regional magazines and newsletters that do the same thing.
If I could add one thing on the publications, if you decide that one of the things you want to improve for yourself is the ability for the words to just roll off your tongue, to really improve the delivery of what you're calling, a lot of the older square dance magazines, when they had a lot of the fill-in patter printed, is an excellent resource to just practice words. Possum on a fence, post chicken on a rail. Things like that that can be kind of the tongue twister type variety, but they can really do a lot with music playing to help you improve your abilities just to get the words rolling off the tongue. And that can be something that you may decide, that's one of my goals. I want to learn how to just be able to deliver words in a more flowing manner. Also, as far as the singing calls that you buy, the cheat sheets that come with them, if you decide that you want to improve the flow of your dances, don't just assume that the figure that is with that singing call is properly timed. There are lots of techniques in starting with the CALLERLAB listing of timing for the basic program and the mainstream program, etc. You can sit down and with a little effort, by looking at that list and looking at the figure, jot some notes, some numbers in the margins of how many beats of music does it take to accomplish this figure, add them all up, and find out if you're within that 64-beat phrasing that is most common for the singing calls. That may be one of the things that you decide you want to pursue for your own self-improvement, and it's really a task well worth spending time on.
That's great. Thanks, Greg. As we look down, I'm going to hold off on doing anything with the sound equipment utilization, but you can go out and hire a voice coach or a singing instructor. You can join a church choir. A lot of times I think we isolate ourselves and say, but I'm a square dance caller, and so their techniques won't work for us. And we've found, especially in recent years, that that's not true. We do the same things, we can improve in the same basic ways. So if you have the financial ability to go out and do that and feel that it's something you need to improve your local program or your traveling program, then I think that's a wise investment as well. I'm going to turn this over to Greg and let him talk a bit about sound equipment and that sort of thing. Oh, let me just throw in one more thing. I'm sorry. One of the things that we were talking about yesterday, several of us standing around, people don't read what they get. One of the best ways you can help yourself and help your dancers and help the dancers in your area is to read everything that comes across your desk from CALLERLAB, because it's got some really important information in it. And things that are changing, things that we're maintaining, things that we feel are important policy decisions. And I think it'll keep you up to date, and you'll know exactly where you should go and what sort of resources you should be investigating to keep up with the times. Greg?
Thank you, Laurel. I want to talk for a moment about tape recorders and their use in self-improvement as a tool for self-improvement. For the purposes of the tape, I'm going to read off some things that are on the handout that the people listening to the tape later perhaps won't have. I've been a believer for a long, long time in having a tape recorder and in using it to tape dances, to use that as a tool for self-improvement. But there are so many different things that you can be looking for when you're listening to a tape of your dance. Number one, the obvious one maybe, is to just sometime dance to your self-calling. Take a recording of your self-calling pattern and dance to that and find out how the timing is. Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it right on? How is the body flow? Do you have that constant overflow feeling because of the choreography that you are using? But then you can get into a lot of other little details, things that you can look at. Get out a piece of paper and analyze an entire evening's worth of patter calls and jot down how many times did you use a square through 3/4 to get to an Alaman left? How many times did you use a turn through? How many times did you use a pass through, etc.? All of the different ways that you can figure out to get the dancers to an Alaman left, and kind of chart, where am I on this? Am I always using square through 3/4? Well, if that's what I'm doing, and I want to improve the variety of my choreography a little bit, I need to concentrate on that to a certain extent. I think with the singing calls too, it may sound one way when you're up there calling, but then you hear the tape later and you say, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I did that at that point. And there's a lot that can be learned from that, listening to yourself on the singing calls, as far as how does it coming across? Does it sound like the proper level of excitement for that type of song? Does it sound like the proper type of emotion for that kind of a love song? If you want to achieve the mood of the song, analyze, am I doing what I need to do delivery-wise to achieve that particular mood that I want? Another thing in the area of singing that you can learn a lot from for self-improvement purposes is just listening to the radio. I listen to a lot of country music stations, and I'm just channel surfing all the time and listen to a group like the Statler Brothers or the Oak Ridge Boys, and I pick out a particular voice and try to listen, what is that voice doing with this song? And you can learn a lot just by listening to professional recording artists, either on the radio, watching them on CMT television or whatever, to see techniques that they use that perhaps you can adapt to your own particular needs.
Are you going to do?
Oh, yes, thank you for the reminder. I forgot about camcorders, too. I believe it was Jim Mayo that mentioned to me a while back about the value of videotaping one of your dances sometime. And then when you play back the videotape of the dancers moving to your calls, turn the sound completely off. That way you're not concentrating on the sound, you're concentrating on the flow of the dancers. And if you're trying to determine what your timing is like that you're providing to the dancers, you're going to be able to see, is it stop and go, is it nice continuous flow, and it should be very apparent by turning the sound off and watching that to determine how you are doing your job as far as your execution of the timing of the commands. It might not hurt, too, sometime to have yourself videotaped while you're standing up on the stage. Find out, are you standing there with your hand in your pocket and you're kind of slouching? Or are you standing up tall like you should be? How are you holding the microphone? Are you using hand gestures? Do you want to use hand gestures? Some people don't. I move around a lot when I call. I like to move around. I like to communicate with the dancers out on the floor. I use hand gestures. So if that's where you want to go, fine. Observe a videotape of yourself calling to see, am I progressing in that area? If that's not the style for you, you make that decision because you don't want to be another individual caller who already has a name established. You want to take a little bit of Tom Miller, a little bit of Tony Oxendine, a little bit of Laural Eddy, but not the voice, if you're a man. And although you should have heard her last night in the karaoke room. Man, that was hot. Anyway, you want to pull these various parts from other callers. Take the parts that fit your philosophy, what you want, and then utilize those.
Okay. One of the things that I want to just finish up on this sheet is the interpersonal things that you need to be looking at. I already mentioned that this is a business, and yet it's a people business. There are a lot of times that we look out and we think, all I've got to do is come in and set up my equipment, but there may be some things that you don't know how to do. You may not know parliamentary procedure. You may not know how to conduct a meeting if you're involved in that aspect of it. You may not know how to go to a set of club officers and make suggestions if you are being paid by that club, if you're hired by the club. Lots of college courses are out there, lots of community programs. The vocational schools are always available, and that might be someplace that you can also go and look for voice training or equipment training to know how to handle your equipment or what equipment you need and what equipment you don't need. I think the other most important thing is group dynamics. We have to work with a wide variety of people, and they're from all ethnic, social, economic, intellectual backgrounds. If we don't know how to develop leadership in our folks out there, we may find that the leader that develops naturally is leading our folks in the wrong direction. And you can go a long way in maintaining a much smoother program at wherever you are if you can target those natural leaders and develop their skills and head them in the right direction. And those are some group dynamic programs that are out there. They're all over the place. Some of you who might be in business may also be able to get in touch with those. There are all kinds of motivational speakers out there all over the country who are making mega bucks. I mean, not like us, but making real bucks out there doing promotional and group dynamics. So look into those. Don't limit yourself. The whole world is out there, and everything that you do to build your own self-confidence is going to develop some other aspect of your calling career. So don't think that something is not relevant. As long as it makes you stand more confident to stand before that group and do what we do best, which is called square dances, then I think you have met the requirements for self-improvement.
I've got a few other things we can talk about, but before we do, we'd like to take some opportunity to field some questions perhaps from the floor, or for you to share some experiences that you've had, some thoughts you may have on self-improvement. Once again, a reminder, this is a tape session, so please step to the floor microphone, tell us your name, and then the question or comment, please.
Tom Sellner from Maryland. I was wondering what kinds of things that we should do, like on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, exercises or things like that we can do for self-improvement. What kind of things do you suggest?
I'll throw in one right away, is breathing exercises. One of the ones that I learned a long time ago, and I don't know if the technology of the human body has changed any or not, but they used to tell you to put both arms up above you and reach for the sky and take in a deep breath and then maintain that expansion of your chest and the diaphragm as you lower the arms. And then that establishes your posture. It establishes where the breathing is from. So if you've been to a voice instructor and they've given you lessons on that, or if you've heard some other techniques on breathing, that is something that always, I think, bears constant practice on the breathing, because you get some of the real verbal singing calls that have a lot of words coming one right after the other, and you don't have an opportunity to take a decent breath anywhere. If you've been practicing your breathing exercises, those kinds of songs are going to be easier to deliver. Another thing that I've found that really helps in that, I like to walk. Well, when I go out and walk, I'll walk 4 steps inhaling, I'll walk 4 steps exhaling, and when you get on that kind of a regular pattern, especially if you start going up a little slope, you find out after a while your lungs are starting to really work a little bit. And because 4 steps or 5 steps, whatever you set for your own personal goal, to make an inhale last that long and to make an exhale last that long takes a lot of discipline on the chest and the diaphragm and the lungs. So that can be an exercise that will really improve your breathing.
Well, I'm going to sound like a home economist now, because that's what I am, or teacher. This is not an exercise, but I think it's something that we sometimes take for granted. There are things which affect your breathing, your health, and your vocal cords. Just watching what you're eating. If you're at a dance, you know how it's really easy to run over and... Good, that's good.
In all fairness, is for the folks listening to the tape later, let them be aware that all eyes were cast on the stare that Tom Miller was casting back to Laural.
That's okay. You know how easy it is at a dance to reach over and grab a handful of peanuts on your way back up to the stage to call? Peanuts have an oil in them which affect your vocal cords. They tighten them up, and when you're out calling, you may begin to feel a strain. That's something that we don't usually stop and think about, but you may be feeling it after you've called a couple weeks, and these people are bringing these, well, we have peanuts at my house, so I don't know if y'all do or not, but those kinds of things. Peanuts, pecans, cashews, almonds, anything that have nuts in them, the oils will constrict your vocal cords. Also, milk. You don't want anything that has a milk product in it before you call. That tends to coat the vocal cords and tighten them up. Caffeine is really not a good thing, and we all know we don't drink a whole lot of caffeine. Yeah. We're taking away anything you ever call for, aren't we?
Then to really kill the argument comes along someone like Tom Miller, who does all these bad things and it still comes out beautiful. I mean, what are you going to do?
That's right. The exception. But do beware of some of the things that you're putting into your body, because they will affect how you sound when the sound comes out. There's some other comments, I think, from the floor.
I'm Stan Burdick from Note Service, New York. That's a town. That's not a commercial, okay?
That's 2 for him today, in here.
I just think it's wonderful. Greg mentioned looking through some of the old stuff and picking out some of those great poetic things. Those little, sometimes you call them garbage patter. And you know, it's good to wiggle your tongue and move and do better enunciation, work on that garbage patter, and then throw it in at the dance now and then. And you know, the interesting thing, there's always time when you say, okay, get up on the floor, gang, get up on the floor, and you got music playing and so forth. And right there is a wonderful time to use some of that real old poetic stuff that they used to call years ago. And since we're on tape, can I just give you a sample or two? Okay, research these, and there are loads of these things. I know some of you probably have a slew of them. But one of them goes like this. I was winding down the stream, had a tired load and a heavy team, and I cracked my whip, and the lead horse sprung, and the hind horse busted the wagon tongue. Now, you see, you say that right in the cadence of the music, and the people begin to love it. And then you say, that was for you farmers down there. And, you know, then you go on from there. And you say, for instance, if you can't get another girl to fill in, or a guy, a couple to fill in that square, you say, if I had a girl that wouldn't dance, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd buy her a boat and set her afloat and paddle my own canoe. You see, and that's old stuff that's been around for years and years. And speaking of Southern, you know, there's a cute one. Now, this is really a tongue twister. This is hard. I'm going to say it very slow because I might miss it. But you work on it a while, and you can work these up. It goes like this. an old Southern preacher was sitting on a log with his finger on the trigger and his eye on the hog. The hog went vip, and the gun went boom. The gun went boom, and the hog went vip, and the preacher said, "Damn, I done lost my grip."
Your turn.
Here's Greg. Well, those are really old, Stan. How old are they? 40 to 50 years. I wasn't even thought of then, let me tell you. Microphone, if you would. We'll do that right now, if you would.
I'd like to know where you can find this kind of stuff. That's what I don't know.
Oh, you can take Stan Burdick home with you if you like.
Maybe Stan should put this stuff in print. You know, I think that'd be an excellent idea. I'll give you a card before the meeting's and you can send it to me.
If anybody's interested in what Stan Burdick was just talking about, in case you did not hear, he has it in print, and you need to talk to Stan, and he'll fix you up. All right, thanks, Stan.
Betsy got it from New Jersey. One source of older books is very often a library. They probably bought a Square Dance book to make sure they had total coverage of subjects about 1950-something, and it's really a good source of this historical material. And again, if you take it out and you read it, you will not have made the investment. Also, if you keep your ears open, there are older callers who... older callers who pass away. And their notes are available. I have lots and lots of collections. Someday I'm going to have time to look at it all in my basement that I have gathered for perusal. A third suggestion is to try and develop with your local Callers Association a library of things so that you and the up-and-coming callers can take material out, study it, and then you can figure out which of the books you wish to invest in.
Thanks, Betsy. Along that line where you're developing your own library, you might consider a video library as well, since we're such a technologically dependent society. There are lots and lots of videotapes that are available now, and I think we're going to see that more and more in the future. One other suggestion for a place to get some of these older books and publications, a lot of the libraries have a Friends of the Library Association, and they have an old book sale where they cull the shelves and get rid of some of the old books, or they have people donate them, and you may be able to find several there as well. Some really good ones.
Excuse me, sir, where are you going?
Can I go?
Sure.
Another source.
What's your name, please?
Tony Oxidine. All right, Jack Berg.
Who?
Just another source, too. I've been very fortunate that I have gotten a lot of very old records. And dating back in 1906, there are records that aren't Square Dance records, but they use patter in their songs. I can't recall any, but there were some really nice ones like Sunshine in Your Mouth, and they just rhyme these things. If you have old records, old country records, or even old Square Dances, there's somebody that you know has passed on, these big old 78s, listen to them. They are fantastic for your ideas for the different verbiage that you need for calling. They're sensational. Like I said, I've got so many of them, they're great. Now can I go?
You're excused.
Thank you.
Gene Arnold from California. I think one important one you overlooked is the Congressional Library. Congressional Library has so much old-time material, people that were calling dances long before any of us even, and it's all there.
Also, the Lloyd Shaw Foundation, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the Lloyd Shaw Foundation has access to an awful lot of that, and they are networking with the with the Library of Congress in Washington as the official traditional dance, is that right? Traditional dance library. So,
to address that a little bit, I'm a member of the Lloyd Shaw Foundation. I don't know, I'm Bob Riggs. I don't know all the details, but in Albuquerque, New Mexico is the Lloyd Shaw Foundation Archives. And in that building, which is, the Lloyd Shaw Foundation bought a building, which is a dance hall, but there is also a huge room in the back which contains the archives. And in it are literally thousands of documents and magazines and records and everything. And that is, as Laural said, is being networked with the National Archives and is a tremendous source if you happen to be looking into the research. You basically have to go there and dig into it because they don't have the manpower to distribute it from that location.
Hi, Mel Dixon from Reading, Massachusetts. We have the Square Dance Foundation of New England that has been functioning for some 5 years now at our new property. And we are, of course, raising funds, but we do have a museum and archives, and we are in the process of collecting lots of things. We have bundles and bundles, and we're working on some people to help to catalog and get all that stuff in order.
Tom Sumner from Maryland again. I'd like to ask each one of you what would be a normal, if you're practicing, say, what do you do on a daily basis to improve your calling, each one of you?
Well, I drink milk and eat peanuts. Yeah, I'll start that question off, I guess. One of the things that I like to do is I have an opportunity to be during the day throughout the week. I'm home with my little girl, so my wife's working, and it's a great opportunity to take that time without any music, and I did it even before my daughter was born. Throughout the house, constantly sing. Just not to help you with your diction and so forth, but it kind of keeps the vocal cords flexed. And there's not a time that I'm not, and I mean this very sincere, there's not a time or throughout the day that I know at least 4 hours throughout the day that I'm constantly singing. If there was somebody in the background that was standing there that I did not know, they'd probably think I was absolutely insane because I'm constantly singing, calling square dance calls. It doesn't even work. But just calling, just relay the deucey and do all the things in between, then square through 4. Just constantly practice, just practicing them calls. As for music and so forth, I like to take when I get new music in and so forth, I like to take a cassette tape and put all that music on the tape, and I got it to go to my dances to and from. And I can listen to that music as I'm driving. I can sing to it. It's when you're driving the interstate and you're doing that, that's okay. But if you get into a traffic jam and there's somebody sitting on the side and you're going, "I'm in left with you left hand," then that next guy pulls up. You go, "I don't want a part of that guy beside me." So that's right. But anyway, so that's so I'm constantly. I mean, as soon as I get up in the morning, I start humming. It just makes the day go better. And then when you're ready for your dance and you're ready for that glass of milk and your can of peanuts, for the lunch, then the afternoon starts. When you're going to the dance, you can listen to your music and you do the same thing over. Not necessarily, putting the calls to the music, but just learning that music, getting your vocal cords flexed, and it's a great exercise. It's a great exercise. Another thing I do is spend a lot of time. Is with the it's a tool basically is the checkers, and I'm sure that everybody has one time or other used checkers, and there's so many ways of doing it. I've done already with the decks of cards and cut them in small pieces. I've set out a restaurant already and asked a waitress for 4 pepper shakers and 4 salt shakers, and kind of go through a movement that I did something at the dance that I thought was and I put it down with the salt and pepper. There's the magnetic stand that has the 8 figures on it. They're all great. So this is something that I do throughout the day to constantly keep me thinking about square dance calling and square dancing. And so I'm very fortunate to say that it is it's kind of fun to do, especially when you're by yourself. Since there's nothing else to do, and you stay slim like me, and you get to eat peanuts, and so it's an exercise. I get a lot of exercise, very much. Shut up. Shut up. We're on side 2, right? Laura?
Okay, I don't call every night of the week. In fact, I call only a couple of nights a week. So I don't feel that I probably drive myself as much as I ought to. There are a couple of things I do. When the tape service comes in, I subscribe to a tape service. When it comes in, I put it in the tape player. I listen all the way through before I make any decisions about anything, whether I like the choreography that they used on the tape service, whether I like the music, whether I think the caller was good or bad. I just listen to it as if it were music. Then I let it sink in, and then a little while later I throw it back in and think, okay, now I'm listening purely for music. That's all I want to think about right now. And then make the selections if I want this record or that record. A lot of times I don't want any of them. And then there are a lot of times when I want a whole bunch of them. So it just gives me a chance to feel the music a couple of times. Then I go back through again and listen to the singing call figures that they put on the record and pull those off that I think are appropriate for my folks and those that I think have potential, or maybe those that trigger something in my mind to make me want to do something a little different, but so I can utilize whatever figure they've got. And a lot of times we'll jot them down in something like this. I carry this in my briefcase all the time. You can see where I've marked it for a dance. But then I can just flip it up. If I want a gimmick, I've got a sticky pad, one of those stick-it things. There it is. And it's just a refresher. I'm not reading it, but I've got it written down for me. The other thing that I do is I'm a site caller. And that's a really bad disadvantage. Last summer, I was very sick, and I couldn't look at all those people who were swirling out there. It was just very disturbing. So I started doing an awful lot of mental image stuff, and I found that it was improving some of the choreography that I was coming up with if I could make these folks in my head dance a little bit better. So during the day, they're not the greatest dancers in the world, folks. I'm keeping score and taking names, buddy. Greg with 2 G's. Okay. But if I can work on some of that choreography mentally and then go back with the checkers later and check it out, I've had a chance to think through the entire process. Where did it start? Where did it finish? Was it smooth body flow? Were the hands correct? Was it correct hand usage? Did I like it? Did I think it danced well from the man's point of view and the woman's point of view? And then once I've written it down, it's in my mind, and I'm not going to have to worry about trying to dredge it back up a little bit later when I say, oh, wish I could remember that figure that I was piddling with the other day. So those are a couple of the things that I do on maybe a weekly basis.
Before I comment on that, I just want to say, we talked earlier, I believe, about deciding what kinds of things we want to improve on for ourselves. Where do we want our self-improvement to come? One of the areas I decided a long time ago that I needed self-improvement on was my ability to just relax a little bit. I mean, I was one of these accountant types. I'm still an accountant, quiet type when I was in high school, and really, nervous about stuff. And I decided that I needed to relax a little bit, so to speak, get a life. And years ago, I never would have dreamed of teasing Laural the way I do now. and I'm sorry, Laural, but that's the way I am now. It's just, and I've, yeah. You never know quite what beast you're going to release but I've had several dancers in my club who've been dancing with me for the past 25 years in the club that have said, he's finally starting to loosen up a little bit. They've been working on me for decades, and it's finally starting to work. So they say that about you too, Tom? Yeah. As far as what I do on a daily basis, probably like many callers, I'm ashamed to say I don't do enough. I mean, it's true. I do not do enough. I will if I'm like Laural as far as my scheduling. I call maybe 2 dances a week. I try never to book more than 2 dances a week. I've got a full-time job, and for me that's enough. And I've done it that way for 32 years, and for me it works. But I try, if I'm going to have if I got a special dance coming up, especially let's say I'm doing the annual all-singing call dance for my home club. A few days before the dance, if I don't happen to have a class that week and therefore don't have it not called a dance during the week, and I've not been walking around the house singing like Tom does, because there are usually other people there at the time, and they really would wonder what I'm doing, so I don't do it. But anyway, I will spend a considerable amount of time in the evening just singing the singing calls to get those vocal cords loosened up and to refresh my memory if there's an older call that I've not used for a while. So admittedly, I don't do as much on a weekly basis for self-improvement that I should. I don't tape my dances as often as I should, but I still do those things, just not with a frequency perhaps that would really benefit me from a self-improvement viewpoint. Any other questions or comments for the microphone at this point? Yes.
Stuart Summers from New York. One of the things that Tom had mentioned earlier about going to seminars, for that and also for, the tapes, going back, a tendency a lot of us have is to get the tapes and maybe just play them once through. And what we tend to forget is, as time goes on, we've changed. If we go back to tapes that we've picked up, a year ago or 2 years ago, we'll find something different about the tape because we've changed, we've developed more. And one of the other resources, it doesn't have to be Square Dance, there are, from the business viewpoint, there are companies that do sell self-improvement tapes, the group dynamics, people who have problems with their memory. Let's see, what was that name again? They do have them, and they are available for use. And it's very easy. Take them, plug them in your car.
Some libraries also have access to that, so you don't have to invest in them. Go to the library. If you haven't checked out your local library, here's their plug. Go check it out, because you never know what kind of resources are there till you see. Are there some other comments? Other ideas that you may have for self-improvement that we haven't thought of, or areas that you think you need to have addressed if you want help in some area?
I'll go ahead and make a comment if someone wants to walk to the microphone while I'm doing so. I had put a note on the backside of one of the handouts that callers shorthand for writing down choreography. If you have a goal of improving your eye contact with the dancers, and if you have not gotten to that stage yet where you have done a terrific job of memorizing routines, if you're not at that stage yet where you are comfortable sight calling, then a caller's shorthand is something that's a very valuable tool to keep you from reading the calls. I mean, hopefully it is choreography that you are familiar with, so that you just need a reminder. I can stand up here with a sheet of paper, my notes laying on the table, glance down and see 2 or 3 lines of choreography just because I've devised my own shorthand, my abbreviations, my symbols that I use to denote the various basics on the list. And that way, with a quick glance, I can refresh myself as to what the choreography is that I want to call, but yet I'm not losing that contact, that eye contact with the dancers on the floor. And this has had a side benefit. I've gotten proficient enough at the shorthand that I can just about write it down as fast as the caller is calling it. So if you want to do a lot of research, you can really get a lot of stuff written down if you've got a good shorthand.
Tom Summer from Maryland. Since I asked a question about self-improvement, I'll tell you what I do. My pattern records, I play them until I just put them on. And some things I'll do is I'll actually go in a different room in the house, and they sound differently because the walls filter out the sounds. And you'll hear things on the records that you never thought were there. And sometimes if you're using your voice in such a way and you're modulating with the record and things that we play with our voice slightly to entertain the dancers as well as that, you'll hear different instruments coming in that you never thought of. And the house is definitely a good filter. You can go from room to room and you'll hear that record in a different room. It'll be completely different. And that's one of the things I do. I like to play my pattern records a lot. So they're familiar to me as my singing calls. And I want to make sure that I'm not using the same records. I'm very bad at this. My wife used to say, did you realize that you use practically the same sounding records all night long?
And you don't realize that, and so you have to, this variety in music, sometimes you really have to work at these things. And because we like country western, or we like this, and we really like it. So we think, oh, everybody does that. But you've got an audience out there who likes lots of stuff, and you're calling for them, not for you. So you have to go out and you have to get some country western records and some Perry Como type records, and you have to program it in. And if I don't sit down and do my programming, that's part of my practicing actually, is to do the programming, but also my voice techniques, because it's different calling for these different records. And calling the country western records and singing a Perry Como record, voice-wise, is quite different. It has a lot to do with your dynamics of your voice and what you're doing. And if you don't practice that, you can be very good at doing country western records, but really terrible at doing these others. And you've got to practice both.
Tom, let me ask you this. You said that your wife made a comment about the music that we're using. So that was a way that you identified something that you wanted to improve upon.
That's right.
Now, was the sitting down beforehand and programming the dance the way to get around that, or are there other things that you have now started doing to try to get over that hurdle?
Well, unfortunately, my wife died 4.5 years ago, so now I have to do it myself. What I do mostly is try to get a variety of labels. That's the first thing. If you listen to the labels, a lot of labels have a sound. And unfortunately, some of them record to record sound too much. They're getting better at this in the production, and they're aware that their records sound too much alike. So now they try very much to vary their music. And we have a lot of variety in music. So I listen to, when I'm looking for a section of a night, I make sure I don't do all grands. That's first of all. Or I don't do all royals. I don't do all rhythms. That's the first thing I look. And if I'm ready to go to dance and I'm getting ready for a dance, I look at my records. If I've got 5 royals and 5 rhythms, I say, wait a minute, what am I doing? I didn't do so well. I've got to look at this. Also, you like a certain pattern. You just love the sound of this pattern, so you use that same pattern every dance. And I've even heard callers use the same pattern twice in a dance. I very seldom ever do that. On a rare occasion, I might do that. But basically, programming my music as well as my choreography is something I do on a regular basis to make my dance interesting, because I'm not a dramatic person. I don't have a lot of showmanship. So I got to get my variety through my choreography and through my music. So I have to make sure I do this. And then, like I say, I don't have a partner anymore, so I must program myself. And that's part of your practice. It may not seem as part of your practicing, but it really is. The practice of taking 5 minutes before you do your dance and make sure that you program something. Even 5 minutes, 10 minutes is better, an hour. Whenever you have a dance to do, it's for class, I can do that. I have it all written up, I know exactly what I do, I can go, I don't have to practice or nothing. Wrong. Because what you haven't done, if you haven't looked and said, oh, last week I taught this call, but, they were having trouble with this other thing. And if you don't remind yourself and program yourself to go teach that class, you're going to go teach those 3 figures, but you're going to forget what you should have improved their dancing on and what you should have practiced them on. All of these things go into improving yourself. And that's what we're talking about, self-improvement. So whatever you can do, it seems like, okay, I'll practice my voice, I'll put on my singing calls, and now I've done my practice, I'm done. No. There are so many things that really go into doing this. I'm like them. Tom's a full-time caller, but Laural and Gregg are I like them. I call twice a week at most. And lately I've been calling less or sometimes more. But the whole thing is, the things that you have to do is it's like everything's it's all programming in a sense. Program your music, program what choreography you got to use. Have I been using square through too much? Have I been using swing through too much? Or if I call on different levels, do I use load the boat in every tip? All this kinds of things. And if you do that, then you have to go practice your choreography. That's checkers. But, you can play with your checkers all day, but if you don't put your pattern record on and then call the choreography that you're practicing, when you get out to the microphone, you'll be back to calling load the boat almost every tip, even though you set out and you wrote all this stuff up. If you don't actually practice it calling before you get there, you'll just be calling load to boat every time.
Thank you,
Anything
Tom.
else,
I
Greg?
wanted to amplify on one of the things you said a moment ago, and that is about we have all these things to consider, all these things to think about, all these things to improve upon. If I didn't say it earlier in the session, I want to emphasize now, especially if you go to like a week-long callers college. The tendency is you have all that information that you're absorbing. You have critical comments that are made by the instructors on, well, you need to work on this and this and this and this and this. What you want to do probably is to take notes of all those things that you need to work on, but don't try to go home and work on all of them at once. It will doom you to failure if you try to absorb too much at one time. Learning is a peak and valley experience. The improvement is a peak and valley experience. It's not all a steady climb. You're going to have periods of good improvement on this particular area and maybe not so much here, and then you'll get a burst of improvement here. But if you try to work on all the stuff at once, it's too much. You cannot handle it, and it will just frustrate you. Yes?
My name is Dan Koft. I'm from New Jersey. Tom, something that I do all the time. I don't quite program ahead of time nearly as much as I think I ought to. But after a dance, while I'm putting my record case back in order so I know where things are, I write down what I just used for my classes, what I've used at a club. I keep that in my briefcase. When I go back to that club, I'll review what music did I last use here, patter and singer, to make sure I don't do the same music all the time. One of the first callers I danced to, I learned Alpine Hoedown and several variations to its harmonies because he used it every dance, sometimes 2 and 3 times.
Thanks.
I'm Bruce Simpers from Baltimore, Maryland, and instead of writing it down, I have, once I use the records, I've got used patter and used singers. Once I go to put them into the record case, the patters go to the back of the patter section, and I've got a section of used singing calls, so that those don't get used the next dance, and it'll be a couple dances down the road before I have to use it, and I save having to write it down.
Thank you.
I'm Nasser Shuker from Louisiana. I'd like to know if y'all think that setting goals and trying to achieve goals is important in self-improvement.
Absolutely. If you don't have a goal, what are you going to improve? If I don't say, you know, my choreography really needs a little work, I need to do something different, then there's nothing to work on and you have no long-term plateau at which you're headed. I think a lot of times we don't know how to set those goals because we either set them way too high or way too low. You need to find something that's realistic, that you can meet, but not that's so easy that by tomorrow I can come up with 5 new singing call figures. 5 new singing call figures. I don't have to count that high, only to 4. So, you need to set realistic goals. I think if you're going to set a goal, you might as well write it down. That sets it in stone. It makes it a lot more concrete. You know where you're headed. You can go back a month from now, a year from now, 5 years from now and decide. And I think in self-improvement, you also need to be looking at the long term, not just the short term. Next week I want to call my dance better than I did this week. That's much too general. Next week I want to up the tempo of the dance, not the speed, but the bounce of the dance by changing this, and this. I want the people to go away walking on air. Okay, these are the things I'm going to do. But then I've also got to have some long-term goals. 5 years from now, I want to be sure that I've got 70% of the folks who are dancing here right now still dancing with me, and that I've doubled the size of the club. So I think it is important that you write all those things down. Sort of that goes along with that is, we've all heard the old cliche, maybe it's not all that old, if it feels good, do it. That's not always true. But if you hear a critique from somebody who says you're really doing this poorly, and you look at yourself, you need to be honest with yourself enough to say, that's not my style, I can't change that. There are things that I will do that will be very different from Tom or Greg simply because I'm a woman, and I don't feel comfortable with that. Doesn't say it's right or wrong, but I have to make that judgment call. So take whatever criticisms you get, filter them through, see if they're valid or not, and judge whether or not you're going to spend the effort, the time, the money, and the energy to make those kinds of improvements in whatever program you're doing.
I had a heck of a thought that something you reminded me of, and now I've totally spaced it out. That's one of the advantages when it comes to the area of self-improvement. When you've got a lousy memory like mine, everything's always new. It's just constant improvement. It's wonderful. Always making new friends. Tom, you have anything while I'm trying to dredge this up out of the bottom of my mind?
One of the things that I'm sure that in the last hour or so we talked about, and someone comes up to me and says, one time at a dance, he says, "What do you think about a dancer that's real close to you that comes up and says that your patter that you just got done doing really was terrible? And what do you tell those people that this couple that you're real close with?" First thing you tell them is thank you. Number two thing you tell them is this. You tell them that you didn't realize that you were doing this, and you're going to go home and try to figure out what you did wrong. Just the reason being is because dancers hear things that you don't expect that you're saying. In other words, as maybe a little joke that you said that you thought might be funny, they heard it, and it didn't sound funny at the time. And if they tell you things like this, it's very important, to try to go back home and figure out what you said. And this is what's nice about tape recording some of your dances, and you can listen. Criticism from a close dancer, or criticism just from a dancer alone. Don't ever, if a dancer comes up to you and says, that was really lousy, say, "Hey, if you don't like it, here's your money back. You don't have to come back and dance to me." One person's like telling 100 persons. 100 persons like telling 1,000. You just dug yourself a hole, you might as well crawl into it. The best thing to do is say thank you, and I will try to do better the next time. And the next time you dance to me, let me know how I did. And the dancer is walking away as the winner, because don't forget, they're our customers. They're our customers. So the customer is always right. So it's very important to remember that. Number two is this. If your spouse, partner, wife, whatever it might be, comes up to you and says, that singing call, oh my goodness, that singing call was ferocious. Don't ever do it again, as long as, believe her or him. Don't ever do it again. Your spouse knows. I mean, if they do something and they hear it and they don't like it, 9 times out of 10, it was terrible, because they hear things also that you don't. I know my wife, she said, if I'm practicing a singing call and she comes up to me and says, "Oh, I like that," then I know that she's telling the truth. But if I'm practicing a singing call and she's pretty handy to me, and she doesn't make an instance to say, "Tom, I like that," then I'll say, "Did you like it?" She goes, "Yeah." I pick up the needle instantly, and I start over again, and I'll say, "Well, did you like it this way?" I pick up the needle instantly, and do it again. Because there's so many ways you can change your way of doing the singing calls and so forth. So criticism is very important. And the bottom line is that when I went to caller school with Earl Johnston and Al Brennich years ago, they said one thing that you got to remember, that when if you're being criticized, take it for what it's worth. If you don't like what you were told, let it go in one ear, keep it there, and when you get home, put it out the other. Don't ever, take it out on the person that did the criticism to you. It doesn't matter if it's a dancer, a calling colleague, a spouse. You have to leave it in there and think what that person just told you. Your name, sir?
Stan again. Can I speak one more time? Kathy whispered something in my ear, and she...
Shame on you, Kathy. Hey, Stan, just to let you know that Kathy whispered something in my ear this morning, too.
She broke me, thank goodness, of the habit of saying, touch her quarter. Remember that? We used to do that sometimes. But it is almost harassment to say, touch her quarter, and just to be funny. And I remember one time calling in West Virginia, and I said, look her in the good eye. Have you ever done that? You box the gnat, look her in the good eye, and right and left through. Well, a person walked up to me, a woman walked up with me with a glass eye, and I felt so bad. That cured me right there of ever saying things like that again. So we do have to be very careful about these things. But on another subject, Laural mentioned various books. Gene Trimmer also, thinking of programming now, Gene Trimmer did a wonderful book, and I've forgotten the name, but I think it's Specialized Squares and Novelty Squares or something like that, and Crowd Pleasers. It's available from, can we say that, from where it's available? From a guy that happens to be here that sells Supreme and other products and so forth. Anyway, that's available. I'm not allowed to say that, but anyway, that's a great book for those change of formation things. You know, if you're just doing squares all the time through the evening, that's fine. But sometimes you want that progressive squares formula, because you got 4 squares, 8 squares, 6, whatever, and you want to do that. But the formula is there, and the tandem, the double squares, it's there, and hexagons, it's all there in that book. So I think that's a good resource too that we need to think about. Can I just mention one other little thing? When you aren't too good at quips and things, and you're not naturally funny, but you need some canned stuff, research the things that guys do. I love Jimmy Lee's giggle, for instance. You know, I wish I could imitate that. And there's so many things you can pick up from other callers, but I think taking the record, I think just picking up the record and saying something this is a canned thing. You pick up the record and like, who was it used to do that? Well, one caller would pick up and see, green record. Hey, I love green records. And he puts it down and plays it, and that's all. But then he kind of whispers almost in the mic, says, I like Black Label better. And then he goes on, you see, and they don't get it at first. And then he'll do something like this. He'll say, this number is one I recorded under the pseudonym of Jerry Haig. And then he goes ahead and plays the record. You see, and these are canned things that you do. And I like this one. Sometimes you'll ask the crowd, how many service people do we have? How many that were in the service or are in the service now? And you'll always see a bunch of hands go up. And you say, well, I'm dedicating this number just for you. And this sounds like an Ed Foote corny thing, you know. But sometimes it goes over and they kind of laugh at it. You say, the name of the record is... oh yeah, she was nice to the infantry but rotten to the core. And then you play the record. And I know that some of that is corny, but on the other hand, if you need that kind of thing, it's out there and available. There's a lot of things like this that you can do that's really kind of cute, kind of different.
Betsy Gotta from New Jersey. Laural, I think, was talking about writing down your goals. For short-term goals, I will write down at a dance, like one of the things that I am still working on and will probably work on till the year 2000 and whatever, is my resolutions, because I don't have the time that I really want to find all the different ways that everyone else has found to resolve the set. And it has nothing to do with the fact that I work a full-time job and call about 5 nights a week. It has nothing to do with that. I'm sure I could find the time if I were more organized. But in the meantime, what I have done is I set a goal to learn one resolution, and I will work it back to a known spot, such as a 1P, 2P, or 0 line, and then I will write choreography that takes me to that resolution so that I can start to recognize the particular place where the actual resolution that I want is going to start. And after I've worked through the choreography to that resolution, then I start seeing the resolution as it goes by in my regular choreography. And after another period of time with practice, I've made it mine, and then I move on to another one. And that's a one thing at a time way of doing it. But if you set that specific a goal, then rather than writing down 5 resolutions, if you write down 5 resolutions, none of them will stick. If you work on one at a time, then you will add that to your repertoire.
I recalled, while we got other people walking to the microphone, I recalled what it was that I was going to mention a little while ago. If one of your goals is to improve your ability to learn singing calls, to memorize the figures to the singing calls. Many, many years ago, Von Perry shared a secret in a caller's school on this subject, and he said, just get out on the floor all by yourself and walk yourself through the choreography a few times. And by walking yourself through the choreography, imagining the hand holds, imagining the turns, imagining the positions, and going through that on the floor yourself, that it can be an aid to help you learn the singing call figure.
Cindy Hawley, East Longmeadow, Massachusetts. I just have a question in regards to your equipment and how often we put one record on and leave our tone controls and everything set at the same spot and not change that.
There's tone controls on the turntables? Yeah, good point. No, because we don't have any records here, but out of courtesy, we have not even touched I've got the treble control on the microphone set much too high for my normal voice, but it's a very definitely a self-improvement, especially on the music. Tom was talking earlier about taping the singing calls to practice in the car, and also to just listening to the music, to become very familiar with the music, just like Tom over here said about, I believe it was someone made the comment about owning the music, and that's the terminology for being so familiar with the music, including where you want to set the tone controls. If you listen to it at the hall earlier or in your home on your PA set, and you find out this one really needs the bass brought out. With my memory, I'm not going to remember that. Jot down a note on the record jacket or whatever as to what the bass setting should be for that particular song. Excellent point.
Hartmut Niemann, Germany. Tom said about criticism, and I don't know how you feel, but very often, well, sometimes dancers come up and say, well, wonderful what you did. I like that, but it doesn't help me at all. I think the big thing is, if somebody comes up to you and says, well, I didn't like this or that, he's most probably right. Well, if he says, I like or I did not like, then he is right. And we really should consider it, and we should say thank you, because that's what helps us to change, because how do we know what they want to if they don't tell us? And we should encourage the dancers to come up and say, I liked it, I did not like that.
Anyone else with a comment or question? Okay, well, we want to thank you for coming this afternoon to our session. Tom Miller, Laural, Eddy, and myself, Gregg Anderson, and we appreciate your participation especially.
One more quick thing. Can I have your attention just for a moment that we failed to do? That the literature that we talked about is laying up here on the table. Come up and take a look if you like. Write down the names and so forth.
Hughes? Yep.